Podcasting from Hartford, you're listening to the Connecticut Scoreboard Podcast.
We've got the game of the century this weekend. Everyone's hyping it up. We've got UConn, UMass football. Joey Aliberti, he covers UMass football over at MassLive. Joey, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you. I really appreciate the time again, Jared. How are you going? How you doing?
Good. I'm doing well. I'm excited for this game. I know both of these teams are looking for a win this weekend in what should be a pretty competitive game.
Yeah. Like I was just saying to you, I think this is the most evenly matched game, at least for UMass's standards. I know UConn's been in two really close games the past 2 weeks, but for UMass's standards, other than this, they have two games against FCS opponents, which they should be in UMaine and URI. But yeah, they're both, I think it's 129 and 130 in the national standings right now.
Yeah. So take us through. I know it's tough to see what the expectations and how UMass has lived up to them. I think coming into the season, people thought both UConn and UMass would be struggling throughout the season, just given the past history there. But what have your overall thoughts been on this UMass football team this year?
So we knew coming into the year that this team was going to be a little better just because they were abysmal the past two seasons. And Walt Bell was finally able to get somewhat of a full recruiting class of like his kids onto the roster this year. And the upgrade at quarterback was obviously the most notable. He brought in graduate transfer Tyler Lytle, who hurt his wrist, basically broke his wrist. And then true freshman Brady Olson, who's probably the most talented quarterback that UMass has had since Walt Bell has been on campus. So you knew, just because the most important position was a lot better off than the 2 years prior, it was going to be a little bit better of a team at the very least. And I think you saw that obviously in the Pitt game. It looked like they missed no beats from last year and they just were doing the exact same thing. But then putting up 28 points against BC, and then Eastern Michigan showed that the offense had a little bit of a spark. Nothing like, whoa, like this is a good team now, but they didn't look like they were dramatically worse than the 129th team in college football. They looked like they were, instead of being miles away from everyone else, they looked like they were right at the bottom, which I thought was honestly a steady improvement from the past two seasons.
I know you talked about those games, and them being able to put up some points against Pitt there in BC, but it seems like the past couple games have been pretty tough on UMass. What's been the difference between, maybe some of those flashes they were able to show and where they are right now?
Brady Olson came out, I think, in those first two games, or his first two starts against BC and Eastern Michigan, and combined for over 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. I want to say it was maybe 3. And then in the past two games against Coastal Carolina, who is the best team the Minutemen will be facing this year. They're ranked number 15th in the country right now. But then against a team like Toledo that really isn't anywhere near even what Boston College is, he just didn't look good at all, combining, I think, for less than 200 passing yards and a touchdown. So I think that's just classic true freshman still learning, and defense is kind of figuring out how to stop a true freshman quarterback that doesn't have a fantastic set of offensive linemen around him and offensive weapons. And I think they just learned to pressure Brady and kind of get him a little more nervous. And that has kind of led to the offense just being worse. I think the defense is actually, you could argue for the point, obviously it didn't look like it in the Coastal Carolina game because Coastal Carolina's offense is one of the most high-powered offenses in the nation. But against Toledo, you could tell they were making small steps that whenever the offense didn't set them up in an awful field position, they would stop Toledo's offense and force them to punt more than they had, I think, any other team that they've faced so far. So the defense, even with injuries to defensive backs like Josh Wallace and Dante Lindsay, are making slow progressions, but the offense has taken a step back in these last two games. And I think that's just due to the fact that Brady Olson has gotten looks that he wasn't getting in those first two games, and people are starting to figure that out.
I know it's tricky when you're talking about teams towards the bottom tier of college football to pick a strength for the team. But if you had to pick a strength for this UMass team, what would you say it is?
Can I say the punting? George Georgopoulos. He's had 2 punts that have been at the 1-yard line in the past 2 games, and the punt team has actually looked okay these past 2 games. I know against Coastal Carolina, Evan Deckers, who's like the only player on UMass right now that shows true promise of maybe having a chance at the next level in the NFL. He's, I think, one of the better long snappers in the entire FBS. And he had 1 missed snap. But other than that, George Georgopoulos has put I think probably around 5 punts within the 20-yard line in the past 2 games, and then 2 of those at the 1-yard line. So that punt team's looking really good. But the offense and the defense, especially the offense, has looked just atrocious the past 2 weeks. They looked like they flashed some promise, and Olsen was able to fling the ball around and to other guys. Rico Arnold was looking really good. But that's kind of faded away in these past 2 games. So yeah, I guess I have to say the special teams.
Is there a big weakness? And again, when we're talking about teams at this level, we could probably say, where do you begin when it comes to a weakness with some of these teams? But what's the biggest weakness of this UMass team that UConn might be able to exploit in order to get their first win this weekend?
If it's anything similar to what it has been last week, I would say they'll be able to hold Brady Olson and not allow this UMass offense to get off the ground at all. They also just lost one of their starting running backs in Kieran Adams for the year, who got ankle surgery, I think today. So that leaves 1 scholarship running back left on UMass, and that's Ellis Merriweather. He's a big dude, but and he actually had a really good game against Eastern Michigan for 144 yards, but it hasn't looked good for this UMass offense recently. And I think Lou Spanos is the head coach, defensive-minded guy. I feel like he'll be able to find ways to really make Brady Olson feel very uncomfortable, especially coming off of a game where he was not comfortable at all.
I've got to ask it. What's the feel around UMass, around football, and what the team is like? I know it's tough when the team's struggling, but is there any excitement around the team?
I actually was on Twitter like yesterday, I think it was, and one word that I heard that I thought really interested me was apathy, and the fact that people are just becoming numb to UMass football. And UMass hockey is kind of what is driving this campus in terms of sports, coming off of that national championship win. But people are just used to UMass football being down in the 129, 130 range in terms of college football, Division I college football programs. And people know they're bad. Kids go to the tailgate just to, party for those 3 hours before the game, and then they go home and sleep. And then party later that night. They do anything they can to make sure they don't go to those games. If you come up this Saturday in that Amherst game, it'll probably be, other than the BC game, just because of the proximity of BC, it'll probably be the most packed game just because UConn is so close. But even then, I don't think the stadium will be more than halfway filled of its, I think, 22,000 capacity.
I know both these teams have kind of struggled to find a rival of late. Do you see this UMass team viewing UConn as a rival, if anything, just due to the proximity?
I do. Because Walt Bell actually, so I talked to Walt Bell and Ellis Merriweather, the running back that I was just mentioning yesterday, and they both talked about how this is like a really important game, and they kind of care more about this game because Walt Bell specifically said he knows how much is on the line and how many people this game affects. So I think he's referring to the fact that if UMass does lose this game, which I am seeming to feel that there's a higher and higher chance as the days go by, it's just people are gonna be angrier, and I mean it's just gonna look a lot worse. Obviously, having these 2 jobs are the toughest in college football as we speak. What Lou Spanos and Walt Bell are trying to do right now, but at the same time, there is a pressure to become at least a little better. And I guess a loss against UConn definitely does not do that. But they both, Merriweather and Bell, both heightened the importance of this game in comparison to others just because of the locality. And it seems like they definitely want to try to make it a rivalry.
Yeah, especially now with both of these schools being independent, it shapes up nicely to get that annual game in against the two close to each other and see what can happen. So I'll wrap with this one. If you had to give a prediction, it seemed like you were hinting at one there. What are your thoughts heading into the game?
So UMass's offense, unless they make a turnaround and play similarly to they did in the first 2 starts of Brady Olson, I think this is going to be a low-scoring game on the Minutemen side. I would say UConn. I know they haven't faced like high-caliber teams. It was Wyoming and Vanderbilt, but that's better than I don't know. It's better than nothing,
Yeah.
I guess to say. So I would say UConn would win this game by around 10 points. I'd give it like a 35-24 kind of game is my prediction. What would you say your prediction is?
It just from how it seems like UMass has just struggled to score, and the UConn defense has seemed to pick it up of late too. You know, you saw it in the second half against Army. Again, it was against some backups there, but they seem to be able to shut them down and win actually the second half of that game. Wyoming, who has a pretty high-powered offense, they held in check for the most part and were again leading for most of that game. Vanderbilt is a game they probably should have won. I know I do a weekly podcast. I bring on DJ Morgan, one of the linebackers from the team who co-hosts with me, and we kind of look back at the week. The defense is still pretty upset that Vanderbilt was able to get that field goal off to beat them with a minute or so left in the game. So I know the defense is definitely coming out a bit fired up as they had been the past couple games. The offense is going to be the question too. Tyler Pumachan, who was a true freshman who had been starting for them the past few games, got injured against Vanderbilt. So they're back to Steve Krajewski, who showed in the second half once he got a little more comfortable. He looked pretty confident. So it'll be interesting to see what the UConn offense will look like. But just based on the two trajectories of these two teams, it seems like UConn's slowly but surely climbing up a bit while UMass is kind of going down a bit, if not staying level. I'm going to go with like a 28-10 game for UConn, I think.
Yeah, and the thing that's funny about the trajectory is that at the beginning of the season, when what's his name? I forget. Sorry, I'm coming to a brain fart. The old head coach's name.
Oh, Randy Edsall.
Yeah, Randy Edsall. When he got fired, it just looked like UConn was like going to be the consensus worst team in college football, but UMass has really been making a strong case for that title in the coming weeks. So
yeah, I think that's what's impressed me about this UConn team, and it shows that they're better than what their record is it really could have been easy for this team to just quit on the season. Your head coach gets fired a couple games into the season. It's just chaos. You've got tough games coming up, but they've really stood the course and actually improved. So I think it shows that it's a group that's out there and really does want to fight and kind of prove the doubters wrong that this team isn't one of the worst in college football. So it's setting up to be an interesting game, I think, on Saturday.
I completely agree.
Well, Joey, I really appreciate the time. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.